How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Legendary Loot News. In today's loot chest, we've got more Godfall news, this time coming from an article posted on GameSpot's website just a few hours ago, where they interview Godfall's director Keith Lee and talk about some of the game's mechanics that haven't been discussed in length yet. So finally, we get some news on the loot in the game, more info on Valorplates and Valorplate abilities, crafting and upgrading, mission types, and the level system. So if you are excited about Godfall and want to stay up to date with all the news on the game, especially news surrounding loot, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, as I'll be covering as much news as I physically can. And if you're into loot games in general, I cover tons of other games with loot, so subscribe if you're into that too. So let's open up today's loot chest, hope it's not a mimic, and talk about Godfall. Stay a while and listen. First up is what's most important, the loot. Godfall's loot and loot mechanics are still overall a very vague mystery that we know next to nothing about, but today Keith Lee gave us a little bit more of a tease on loot, so at least that's something. Confirming our original thoughts on the loot mechanic as a whole in Godfall, Lee states that Godfall's gameplay loop is like an intrinsic mastery of the combats, while the loot is more of an extrinsic reward system for you to be motivated to play the game. So it's one part skill driven and one part loot driven, which we've heard in the past, but this article fleshes that thought out a lot more and 100% confirms that the combat won't be just button mashing. You'll have to pay attention to enemy attacks and equip gear that is best suited for your Valorplate and situation in order to successfully combat the over 90 different enemy types in the game. That was also confirmed today via this article. 90 enemy types, guys. That's a lot. Loot is also not going to be just higher and higher numbers and increases in damage, things like that. Loot is more so going to be quality over quantity. You're not going to be getting Borderlands amounts of loot here. They don't want to shower you in vast amounts of throwaway loot that you'll never look at. Instead, the loot you'll be getting will be more about customizing how you actually want to play and investing in that style, as well as gearing up for certain situations. All loot will play its part. That being said, there is a leveling system in Godfall. You don't level up each individual Valorplate, thank the Lord, instead you just level your character. When you level up, you get skill points that you can allocate into a skill tree to get different skills, etc. Pretty basic RPG stuff, nothing too outlandish or new there, at least that we know of for now. Stronger weapons will have level requirements, but if you find a weapon that you really like, you could use crafting materials to upgrade that weapon to increase its power. Crafting takes place at the game's central hub, which is called the 7th Sanctum. And the last tidbit of info I feel is important to share with you regarding the loot and the weapon system is that Lee says that the loot system and the weapons in Godfall is more akin to games like Monster Hunter and God of War, where the loot is a little bit more specific. So when going into this game, keep that in mind. Moving on to Godfall's Valorplates, which we now know are essentially like classes in the game. Once again, there are 12 Valorplates in total, and you unlock them by progressing in the game. The new confirmed info that we got, though, is that each Valorplate will have its own set of stats, its own passive ability, and its own Archon ability. Now, the Archon ability is basically like a super from Destiny 2. This ability that the Silvermane Valorplate has must be his Archon ability. Basically, he gets these glowing, translucent-looking ghost-like swords that kind of hover around him, and they attack enemies as he attacks. This ability is tied to a cooldown, so you can only use it once in a while. This is very good news, as it gives us more of a coherent idea as to why we choose certain Valorplates over others, and gives meaningful choice if you're gearing up for a specific mission or grouping up with others to play co-op. This article also talks about Valorplate augments that you can socket that add different perks and stat changes, but we already knew about that and they didn't dive really any deeper into those, unfortunately. Back to the game's hub, the 7th Sanctum, we learn that this is where you'll select missions and your loadout for those missions. There are story missions, which will have unique story elements to them obviously, as well as a mid-boss and an end-boss, and they all center around the story of you trying to climb the Skybreaker monolith to eliminate the Mad God Macros at the top. Hunt missions is the other mission type that was discussed in this article. Hunt missions remind me of assassination bounties in Destiny 2, except for more important and much bigger. Basically, you have to track down a big boss and kill him. That's about it. The bosses in hunts are different from the bosses in story missions, and apparently there's going to be a lot of bosses according to Keith Lee. That's all the details we got on those, but they seem pretty alright. The more mission structures and mission types there are, the less chance of the game getting repetitive, and you don't want repetitiveness in a loot game, especially if it's not fun. Nobody wants that. At the end of the article, they talk a bit about the PS5 DualSense, and more specifically the haptic feedback that's a heavily advertised feature of Sony's next-gen controller. Essentially, Godfall will be taking advantage of this immersive feature, and the example Lee gives is when you're sliding in-game. Depending on the material you are sliding across, whether it be sand or water or what have you, the vibrations in the controller make you feel like how those surfaces would feel. It definitely sounds cool, but it's such a hard thing to gauge from word of mouth, kind of something that I think we have to feel for ourselves to really understand and grow our own opinions on the haptic feedback thing that Sony just keeps talking about. We still don't have a release date besides holiday 2020, and yes, it's still only coming to PS5 and PC. Nothing has changed. Sorry, Xbox. But that's all the new info we got from this article. I'll link the article down below if you want to read it for yourself, but otherwise that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it or found any informative value in it, give it a like as it helps get the video out to more people, and subscribe for more epic loot news on Godfall and other games. Check out my other Godfall videos if you want. I've covered everything there is to know about the game regarding loot, character progression, RPG elements, everything. Also follow me on Twitter for more game news that doesn't quite make it into videos, and for other game shenanigans and discussions. This has been your daily dose of legendary loot news, and I hope you have a legendary day.